Nia Jackson stands in a packed Crestwood courtroom, wrists unshackled after weeks in chains, as the judge bangs the gavel, tossing out drug charges pinned on her by two white cops. The crowd gasps, her lawyer beams, but Nia's gaze cuts to officers Derek Holt and Travis Boone in the gallery, their smirks cold and steady. A shiver grips her. This isn't over. What began as a simple undercover job has morphed into a racist. Well, that'll haunt her forever. What's their next move? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales like this. 3 weeks before the courtroom scene, Nia Jackson glided through the shadowed backroads of Crestwood, Alabama, her hands steady on the wheel of a beat-up gray sedan that smelled faintly of motor oil and old vinyl. The clock on the dashboard glowed 2 a.m., its green digits casting a dim light across her sharp features. She was wrapping up a covert CIA mission, one she'd spent months on, tracking an arms smuggling ring that had taken root in this quiet southern town. Her cover as a mechanic had held firm, and tonight she'd secured the final intel: names, dates, drop points. All that remained was a clean exit, a drive to the extraction point 30 miles north where her team waited. The road stretched ahead, flanked by towering pines that swallowed the moonlight, their branches swaying in a humid breeze that carried the scent of damp earth. Nia's dark eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, a habit born from years in the field, but the asphalt behind her stayed empty. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. 1 more hour and she'd be out. Then a flicker of color broke the stillness. Red and blue lights pulsed in her mirror, sharp and sudden, like a predator's eyes locking onto prey. Her pulse didn't jump. Training had carved calm into her bones. She eased the sedan to the right, tires crunching over gravel as she pulled onto the shoulder. The squad car followed, its headlights flooding her interior with a harsh glare that bounced off the cracked dashboard. Nia killed the engine, her movements deliberate, and rested her hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, palms up, fingers relaxed. She knew the drill, knew how this could go for a black woman alone on a rural road at night. The wail of the siren cut off, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against her ears. Through the side mirror, she watched 2 figures step out of the patrol car, their silhouettes framed by the flashing lights. One tall and broad, the other shorter, stockier, both in navy uniforms that gleamed under the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Their boots thudded against the pavement as they approached, slow and purposeful. The taller cop reached her window first, his square jaw set tight, a flashlight in his grip. He tapped the glass with it, the beam slicing across her, face forcing her to squint. Nia lowered the window with a flick of her thumb, keeping her expression blank. "Good evening, officers," she said, her voice even, clipped with just enough politeness to avoid trouble. The tall one leaned in, close enough that she caught the stale coffee on his breath. His badge read, D. Holt. "Evening," he drawled, his Alabama accent thick and lazy. "You know why we stopped you?" His partner, badge-flashing T. Boone, hung back near the rear of her car, his hands on his hips, head cocked like he was sizing her up. Nia met Holt's gaze, unflinching. "No, sir, I wasn't speeding. Kept it under 30 the whole way." Holt's lips twitched, a smirk tugging at the edges. "That so? Funny thing, though, you blew right through a stop sign back there." His tone was mocking, laced with something uglier than routine authority. Nia's brow creased just a hair, but she held her composure. "There's no stop sign on this stretch, officer. I've driven it all week." Boone snorted from behind, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the gravel. "You people always think you own the road, don't you?" he said, his voice low and venomous, the words landing like a slap. Nia's jaw tightened, but she didn't bite. She'd heard worse, faced worse, and she wasn't here to pick a fight she couldn't win. "Not yet. License and registration," Holt snapped, cutting through the tension. Nia moved slow, deliberate, reaching for the glove box. Her fingers brushed the fake ID she'd been using for months. Nia Carter, mechanic, Crestwood resident. She handed it over with the car's papers, her eyes locked on Holt as he snatched them from her grip. He scanned the documents, his flashlight flickering over the text, then flicked his gaze back to her. "Local girl, huh? Should know better." than to run signs. His tone was a taunt, daring her to argue. She didn't. "I stopped where I needed to, officer," she said, firm but flat, her voice a steel wire stretched thin. Boone circled to the trunk, his shadow shifting in her peripheral vision. "Hey, Holt," he called, his voice suddenly sharp. "Come take a look at this." Holt straightened, passing her ID back with a flick of his wrist. "Stay put," he ordered, his eyes narrowing as he joined his partner. Nia watched them through the side mirror, her stomach tightening as Boone pointed at something near her rear bumper. Their voices dropped, too low to catch, but the way Holt nodded sent a prickle of unease up her spine. She hadn't left anything in that trunk, not even a spare tire. Whatever they were looking at, it wasn't hers. Her mind raced, cataloging possibilities, a tail she'd missed, a leak in her cover. But she'd been clean, meticulous. This was something else. Holt returned, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he said, the ma'am dripping with sarcasm. Nia tilted her head, keeping her voice steady. "Can I ask why?" Holt's smirk widened. "We've got reason to believe you're carrying illegal substances." The words hit like a punch, but Nia's expression didn't falter. "Illegal? Substances?" she echoed, slow and deliberate. "That's a mistake." Boone stepped up, cutting in with a scoff. "We'll see about that. Out. Now." Nia exhaled through her nose, pushing the door open with a creak. She stepped onto the gravel, her sneakers silent against the stones, hands loose at her sides. No sudden moves, no excuses. She knew how this game was played. Boone moved to the trunk, popping it open with a theatrical flourish. "Well, look here," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the empty road. He held up a small plastic bag, stuffed with a white powder that glinted under his flashlight. "What do you know, Holt? Powdery goodness right where we thought." Nia's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to the officers. Her pulse stayed steady, but her mind spun. That bag wasn't hers. She'd checked the car top to bottom before leaving the safe house. This was a plant, crude and obvious, but effective in a town like Crestwood, where the law bent for men like these. "That's not mine," she said, her tone flat, unyielding. Holt chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Sure it's not. Anything else you want to say before we book you?" Nia's lips curved, just a fraction, a calculated hint of defiance. "I'll save it for the right time." Boone's smug grin faltered for half a heartbeat, but he recovered fast, pulling cuffs from his belt. "Oh, you'll get your chance," Holt said, stepping closer, his bulk looming over her. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute. Big charge for a little lady like you." Boone snapped the cuffs on, yanking her arms behind her back with more force than necessary. She didn't flinch, her gaze locked on Holt as he leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "Should have stayed in your lane," he muttered, the words a venomous hiss. They marched her to the squad car, Boone's grip tight on her elbow, Holt trailing behind with a swagger in his step. The back door creaked open, and they shoved her. Inside, the vinyl seat cold against her thighs. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the night like a gunshot. Nia sat upright, her wrists chafing against the metal cuffs, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as the car rumbled to life. Holt slid into the driver's seat, Boone beside him, and the radio crackled with static as they pulled onto the asphalt. "Gonna be a long night for you," Boone said, twisting to flash her a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Hope you like cells." Nia didn't respond. Her mind was already shifting gears, replaying the stop frame by frame. The fake stop sign, the planted bag, the racial jab. They weren't random. This was planned, a setup with teeth, and she'd walked right into it. She wasn't just a target, she was a message. Her cover might still be intact. They didn't seem to know she was CIA. But that didn't matter now. These two thought they'd snagged an easy win, a black woman they could bury under lies and paperwork. They had no clue who they'd just crossed. The squad car rolled through the pines, headlights cutting through the dark, and Nia's thoughts sharpened. She had a tracker in her shoe, a lifeline to her team. She could activate it, wait for extraction, turn this around. But something told her this wasn't a one-off. Holt and Boone moved too smooth, too sure, like they'd done this before and gotten away with it. The cuffs bit into her skin, a dull ache spreading up her arms, but she ignored it. Pain was noise. She needed focus. Whatever they had planned, she'd survive it. She always did. The car turned onto a dirt road, the station looming ahead, a squat brick building under flickering sodium lights. Nia's lips pressed into a thin line. This was where it started, and it was going to get uglier before it got better. The Crestwood jail loomed under a haze of sodium lights as the squad car jolted to a stop, gravel spitting beneath the tires. Nia Jackson sat rigid in the back seat, her wrists raw from the cuffs, her senses sharp despite the ache creeping up. Her arms. Officers Derek Holt and Travis Boone hauled her out, their grips bruising as they marched her through the station's dented metal doors. Inside, the air stank of bleach and sweat, the walls stained yellow with age, peeling paint curling like dead skin. A desk sergeant, a barrel-chested man with a buzz cut and a crooked nose, glanced up from a stack of papers, his eyes narrowing as they landed on her. "Another one, huh?" he muttered, his voice thick with disdain. "What's this one's story?" Holt smirked, shoving Nia toward the counter. "Caught her with a bag of meth, bold as brass, thinks she's slick." The sergeant's lips parted in a sneer, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Typical," he grunted, loud enough for her to hear. "You lot never learn." Nia's jaw clenched, but she kept her mouth shut, her gaze steady as they processed her. The sergeant's fingers hammered the keyboard, each keystroke a jab, while Holt and Boone lingered nearby, their boots scuffing the scuffed linoleum floor. She was shoved into a fingerprinting station, the ink cold and sticky against her skin, the machine humming as it captured her prints. Then came the cell. A 6x8 box of cracked concrete, the air heavy with mildew, a metal bench bolted to the wall, its only furniture. The bars clanged shut behind her, the sound ricocheting off the walls, and Holt lingered outside, his silhouette dark against the flickering fluorescent light. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his voice a low taunt, before turning away. Boone followed, their laughter echoing down the corridor, a sound that gnawed at her nerves. Alone, Nia sank onto the bench, her back straight, her mind racing. The cell was a pit, the kind of place meant to break people, but she'd seen worse. She shifted her weight, feeling the slight bulge in her left sneaker, where a CIA-issued tracker sat hidden in the sole. One press, and her team would lock onto. Her position extract her within hours. She slid her foot against the floor, her fingers brushing the edge of her shoe, and pressed the concealed button. A faint vibration pulsed against her heel, confirmation the signal was live. Relief flickered. In her chest, a brief spark. Help was coming. She just had to hold on. Footsteps approached, lighter than Holt's heavy tread, and a shadow fell across the bars. A young black cop, maybe 25, stepped into view, his uniform crisp, his badge reading J. Reese. Jamal Reese. His brown eyes darted down the hall before settling on her, a flicker of unease in his expression. "Nia Carter?" he asked, his voice low, hesitant. She nodded, keeping her alias intact. He glanced at the clipboard in his hands, then back at her. "I processed your intake. Something's off with this. Those two, they're too smug." Nia tilted her head, studying him. His jaw was tight, his fingers twitching against the clipboard. He wasn't part of the script Holt and Boone were running. That much was clear. "Off how?" she asked, her tone neutral, probing. Jamal shifted his weight, his gaze dropping to the floor. "They didn't log the stop right. No body cam footage. No dash cam, just their word and that bag." He paused, then met her eyes again. "I don't like it." Nia's pulse quickened, but she kept her face still. An ally, maybe. Someone green enough to question the system, but not bold enough to break it. Yet. Before she could respond, voices drifted down the hall, Holt's deep drawl cutting through the quiet. "Heard her mouthing off in the car," he said, loud enough to carry. "Gonna teach her where she belongs." Boone's chuckle followed, sharp and cruel. "Yeah, she'll learn quick in here." Jamal stiffened, his hand brushing his pocket, and Nia caught the glint of something small sliding between the bars. A burner phone, cheap and black, landed on the bench beside her with a soft thud. "Use it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll get you out." Her fingers closed around the device, cool plastic against her palm, and she tucked it under her thigh as Holt and Boone rounded the corner. Jamal stepped back, his posture stiffening, but it was too late. Holt's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on him like a hawk spotting prey. "What's this, Reese?" he barked, his voice a whipcrack. "Playing messenger boy?" Jamal opened his mouth, stammering. "Just checking her file, sir." But Boone was already moving, his bulk crowding the younger cop against the wall. "What did you give her?" he snarled, his hand darting toward Naya's bench. She shifted, covering the phone with her leg, but Holt was faster. He lunged past the bars, his arm snaking through, and snatched the device from under her. "Well, well," he said, holding it up, his smirk twisting into something feral. "Trying to play hero, huh?" He turned to Jamal, towering over him, and smashed the phone against the concrete wall. Plastic splintered, shards skittering across the floor, and Jamal flinched, his hands rising instinctively. "You're next, boy," Holt growled, his voice low and venomous, the racial edge unmistakable. He grabbed Jamal by the collar, slamming him against the bars, the clang reverberating through the cell block. Boone laughed, a harsh barking sound, and cracked his knuckles. "Should have known better than to stick your nose in," he said, stepping closer. Naya surged to her feet, her fists clenched, but the bars held her back. "Leave him alone," she snapped, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Holt's head whipped toward her, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, you'll get yours," he said, releasing Jamal with a shove that sent him stumbling. "This ain't over." The two stormed off, their boots pounding the floor, leaving Jamal slumped against the wall, breathing hard. He met Nia's gaze, guilt and fear warring in his eyes, then turned and shuffled away, his shoulders hunched. Nia sank back onto the bench, her heart thudding against her ribs. The tracker was still active, her team would come. But Jamal's attempt had been a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope, and Holt had snapped it in seconds. Worse, they'd marked him now, dragged him into their racist game. She stared at the shattered phone, its pieces scattered like broken promises, and a cold certainty settled in her gut. This wasn't just about her anymore. Holt and Boone weren't stopping at a frame job. They were building something bigger, uglier, and she was trapped in the middle of it. The cell felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the air thick with the stench of damp concrete and despair. Nia's fingers traced the edge of the bench, her mind spinning through options. The key. Tracker would bring her team, but how long? Hours? A day? Holt's words echoed in her head. Teach her where she belongs. They weren't just locking her up. They were sending a message, one scrawled in hate and power. She'd faced corruption before, but this was personal, raw, a blade aimed at her skin, and Jamal, caught in the crossfire, might not survive it. She exhaled slowly, forcing her breath to steady. She'd get out, she'd fight, but the cost was climbing, and the clock was ticking. What do you think about Jamal's stand against Holt and Boone? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think he's got the guts to keep pushing back, or let me know if you'd have stayed quiet in his shoes. If Nia's defiance fires you up, smash that like button and hit subscribe to catch every twist of her battle for justice. Now picture this. Nia's waiting for rescue, but what happens when Holt's next move turns the whole town against her? Can she outsmart a mob, or will Crestwood bury her alive? Stick around to find out. Hours dragged by in the Crestwood jail, the damp air clinging to Nia Jackson's skin like a second layer of confinement. She sat on the metal bench, her back pressed against the cold concrete wall, her senses tuned to every sound beyond the bars. The tracker in her sneaker had pulsed its confirmation, a silent promise of rescue, but time stretched thin, each minute heavier than the last. The station hummed with the low murmur of night shift officers, their boots scuffing the linoleum, their voices a dull drone punctuated by the occasional crackle of a radio. Nia's fingers traced the edge of the bench, her mind mapping escape routes she couldn't yet use, exits blocked by steel and suspicion. She'd been in tighter spots, faced deadlier odds, but the weight of Holt and Boone's malice hung over her, a storm waiting to break. Then it did. A shout erupted from the front of the station, sharp and jagged, followed by the crash of glass shattering against concrete. Nia's head snapped up, her body tensing as the noise swelled. a chorus of angry voices spilling through the broken windows. "Get her out here," someone bellowed, the words thick with fury. "Drug-pushing scum," another snarled, closer now, the hatred palpable. Footsteps pounded down the hall, and Officer Jamal Reese burst into view, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with panic. "They're coming for you," he gasped, fumbling with his keys. "Holt tipped them off, said you're a dealer, ruining the town." Nia stood, her pulse steady despite the chaos. "Who?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. Jamal swallowed hard. "White Pride Crestwood, militia types. They're armed." Before he could unlock the cell, a rock sailed through the corridor window, smashing against the bars with a deafening clang. Shards of glass rained down, glinting in the flickering light, and Nia ducked as another projectile struck the wall inches from her head. The mob's roar grew louder, a tidal wave of rage crashing against the station's flimsy defenses. "Hang her," a voice screamed, raw and unhinged. "Clean up our streets." Boots thundered outside, and the air thickened with the acrid tang of gasoline. Nia's eyes darted to Jamal, who froze, his keys trembling in his grip. "Go," she said, sharp and firm. "You can't stop this." He hesitated, guilt flashing across his face, then bolted back toward the front, disappearing into the fray. The bars rattled as two figures loomed into view, their faces smeared with grime and twisted with hate. One, a wiry man with a shaved head and a swastika tattoo curling up his neck, gripped a crowbar. The other, broader, with a patchy beard and bloodshot eyes, hefted a tire iron. "There she is," the wiry one hissed, his lips curling back. "Time to pay, girl." Nia stepped forward, her stance loose, her training kicking in like muscle memory. "You don't want this," she said, her voice a quiet blade, but they lunged anyway. The crowbar swung first, aiming for her skull, and she sidestepped, the metal grazing her shoulder with a sting she ignored. She grabbed the man's wrist, twisting hard, and drove her elbow into his throat. He gagged, dropping the weapon, and she kicked it under the bench. The second man roared, charging with the tire iron raised. Nia ducked low, the swing whistling, over her head, and slammed her fist into his knee. Bone crunched, and he crumpled, howling, clutching his leg as he hit the floor. She snatched the tire iron, ready to finish them, but a siren wailed outside, piercing the chaos. Red and blue lights flashed through the shattered windows, and the mob's shouts faltered, replaced by the bark of orders from state troopers flooding the lot. "Disperse, now!" a megaphone blared, and the attackers scrambled, dragging their injured back into the retreating crowd. Nia dropped the tire iron, her chest heaving, her knuckles bruised but steady. The station fell quiet, save for the crunch of boots on glass and the fading echo of curses. She sank onto the bench, wiping sweat from her brow, her mind racing. The troopers had saved her, or so it seemed. Her shoulder throbbed where the crowbar had clipped her. A dull ache she'd feel later, but for now relief edged in. The mob was gone, her cell intact, her tracker still active. She'd held her own, bought time for her team to reach her. Footsteps approached again, heavier this time, and two troopers in tan uniforms appeared, their faces stern under wide-brimmed "Hakifas, Nia Carter?" the taller one asked, his voice clipped, official. She nodded, wary now. "We're moving you," he said. "Too dangerous here. Mobs riled up thanks to those idiot cops." Nia stood, her instincts prickling. "Moving me where?" she asked, but the second trooper cut in, his tone flat. "County lockup, 10 miles west, safer facility." She didn't like it, the way his eyes avoided hers, the way the first one's. Hand rested too casually on his holster. "I'm fine here," she said, testing them. The tall one shook his head. "Not your call, sheriff's orders." They unlocked the cell, motioning her out, and she complied, her steps slow, her senses screaming. As they escorted her through the station, past overturned desks and splintered glass, she caught a glimpse of Holt leaning against the wall near the exit, his arms crossed, his smirk wide and unyielding. "This is just the warm-up," he whispered. As she passed, his voice a snake's hiss, low enough the troopers didn't hear. Her stomach sank, a cold weight settling in her core. The troopers weren't here to help. They were part of it, extensions of Holt's reach. They marched her outside, the night air sharp with the scent of burned rubber and gasoline, and shoved her into an armored van. The doors slammed shut. The engine growled to life, and the vehicle lurched forward, tires grinding over debris. Nia sat on the hard bench, her hands cuffed again, the metal biting into her wrists. Through the van's narrow window, she saw Crestwood recede, its lights swallowed by the dark, the pines closing in like silent sentinels. The troopers rode up front, their voices muffled but laced with a casual arrogance that set her teeth on edge. She replayed the attack, frame by frame. Holt and Boone had leaked her arrest, weaponized the town's worst elements against her, turned a quiet night into a near lynching. The militia hadn't come on their own. They'd been summoned, fed lies about her crimes, their racism stoked into a fire that nearly burned her alive. And the troopers? Their timely arrival wasn't luck. Holt's whisper confirmed it. This was planned. A first strike meant to scare her, break her, or worse. She'd fought them off, proved she wasn't easy prey, but the cost was clear. The cell hadn't held her, but it hadn't protected her either. Now she was headed to a new prison, one Holt likely controlled, where the next blow would land harder. Nia flexed her fingers, testing the cuffs, her mind shifting to survival mode. The tracker was still active. Her team would adjust to her new location. But how long could she wait? Holt's game was escalating, and the troopers' silence told her they weren't saviors. They were delivery men, handing her over to a bigger trap. The van hit a pothole, jostling her against the wall, and she gritted her teeth against the jolt. Her shoulder ached, her knuckles stung, but she pushed the pain aside. She'd survived the mob, turned their weapons against them, and she'd survive this too. Whatever Holt had waiting at the county lockup, she'd face it head-on. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, and Nia's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. They thought they'd cornered her. They were wrong. The armored van rumbled over pitted roads, its engine a low growl that vibrated through Nia Jackson's bones as she sat cuffed in the back, the metal bench digging into her thighs. The 10-mile trek to the county lockup stretched into an eternity, the narrow window offering only glimpses of Alabama's endless pines, their shadows swaying under a moonless sky. The troopers up front rode in silence, their earlier chatter replaced by a stillness that prickled Nia's instincts. Her shoulder throbbed from the mob's crowbar, her knuckles ached from the fight, but she kept her breathing steady, her mind sharp. Holt's whisper echoed in her skull, just the warm-up. This transfer wasn't safety, it was a handoff, a new stage in his game. The van lurched to a stop, brakes squealing, and the doors flew open, revealing a hulking concrete fortress, ringed with razor wire. County lockup. The troopers yanked her out, their grips rough, and marched her through a steel gate that clanged shut behind her like a coffin lid. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of urine and rust, the walls pocked with graffiti scratched into the paint. A guard with a buzzed head and a gut spilling over his belt met them at intake, his badge reading C. Vance. His eyes raked over Nia, a smirk tugging at his lips as he took her cuffs from the troopers. "Holt's special delivery," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Heard your trouble." Nia didn't flinch, her gaze locked on his. "Heard wrong," she said, flat and cold. Vance chuckled, a sound that scraped her nerves, and jerked his head toward a hallway. "Solitary, for you. Trouble don't get roommates." The troopers handed over her file, their job done, and vanished back into the night, leaving her with Vance and a second guard, a lean man with a scar slicing his cheek, who stayed silent but watched her like a hawk. They shoved her down a corridor, lined with rusted cell doors, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting jagged shadows across the floor. Shouts and bangs echoed from the general population, a distant roar of caged fury. But Solitary was a different beast, silent, suffocating, a tomb of concrete and steel. Her cell was a 6-foot cube, the walls slick with damp, a single bulb dangling. From the ceiling, its light weak and yellow. A bed frame, its mattress a thin slab of foam, sat bolted to the floor, one leg snapped, leaving it tilted. Vance uncuffed her, shoving her inside, and the door slammed shut, the bolt sliding home with a finality that reverberated in her chest. "Get comfy," he sneered through the bars. "Ain't nobody coming for you here." His boots thudded, away, and the silence swallowed her whole. Nia paced the tiny space, her sneakers scuffing the grime, her mind racing. Solitary was meant to isolate, to break, but she'd trained for this. She flexed her wrists, the red marks from the cuffs stinging, and checked her shoe. The tracker's faint hum reassured her. Her team was out there, closing in. But days passed, marked only by the dimming of the bulb as night fell outside. Vance and his crew made sure she felt it. Food came once every 2 days, a tray of grey. Mush slid through a slot, half the portion rancid, the rest barely edible. "You don't need much," Vance taunted on the 3rd day, his voice dripping with contempt. "Folks like you survive on less." Nia ate what she could, forcing it down, her stomach twisting with hunger that gnawed deeper each hour. Water was a trickle from a rusted tap, metallic and warm, but she drank, knowing dehydration was the real killer. By day 5, her ribs ached, her vision blurred at the edges, but she stayed sharp, scavenging the cell for anything useful. She pried a jagged strip of metal from the broken bed frame, tucking it into her waistband, a makeshift shank cool against her skin. If they came for her, she'd be ready. Footsteps broke the silence on the 6th day, soft and quick, not Vance's heavy stomp. A woman appeared, a nurse in faded scrubs, her hair pulled tight in a bun, her dark eyes flicking nervously down the hall. "I'm Ella," she whispered, sliding a tray through the slot. Beneath the mush sat a scrap of paper. "Your team's coming." Nia's pulse spiked, hope flaring bright. Ella added a protein bar hidden under the tray's edge and murmured, "Eat fast, they're watching." Nia nodded, tucking the note and bar away, her fingers trembling with a mix of relief and urgency. Rescue was close. She could hold out. She tore into the bar, the chocolate bitter but life-giving, and stashed the wrapper in her shoe, her mind spinning with plans. Ella's kindness was a lifeline, a crack in Holt's fortress, but the crack sealed fast. Hours later, a scream tore through the block, high and panicked, followed by the thud of flesh on concrete. Nia pressed against the bars, peering through the dimness, and saw Vance dragging Ella by the arm, her scrubs torn, her face bloodied. "Caught her sneaking contraband," he bellowed, his voice echoing, loud enough for Nia to hear every word. "This one's on you, Carter." He slammed Ella against the wall, his fist crashing into her ribs, and she crumpled, gasping, her eyes meeting Nia's in a silent plea before Vance hauled her away. Nia's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms, rage boiling in her chest. She'd brought this on Ella, drawn her into Holt's crosshairs. The door swung open minutes later and Vance stormed in, his bulk filling the cell, his scar-faced partner trailing behind. "You're a real piece of work," he snarled, his breath hot with whiskey. "Assaulting staff now, huh?" Nia blinked, confusion cutting through her anger. "What?" she snapped, but Vance grinned, pulling a crumpled shirt from his pocket, Ella's blood smeared across it. "Found this in your cell," he lied, tossing it at her feet. "Witnesses saw you jump her. That's a new charge, sweetheart." The scar-faced guard nodded, his silence a confirmation, and Nia's stomach dropped. Another frame job, tighter than the last, pinning her with violence she hadn't committed. Holt appeared at the bars, his smirk a slash of white in the gloom. "You're never getting out now," he said, his voice a low purr of triumph. "Assault on a nurse? Judges? Eat that up." He tapped the bars, a mocking rhythm, and sauntered off, leaving Vance to lock the door. Nia sank onto the bed, the metal shard digging into her hip, her mind reeling. Ella's beating, the planted shirt, the new charge, it was a setup within. A setup, Holt's hand pulling every string. She'd thought rescue was near, tasted freedom in Ella's note, but now she was deeper in the hole, starvation giving way to a fabricated felony. Her tracker hummed, a faint lifeline, but the walls felt closer, the air heavier. Holt wasn't just locking her up. He was burying her alive, piece by piece. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, guilt gnawed at her soul, but Nia gripped the shank, her resolve hardening. She'd fight, shank or no shank, team or no team. Holt thought he'd broken her, thought his boys could starve her out, frame her again and walk away clean. He was wrong. She'd survived solitary, turned their game against them once, and she'd do it again. The bulb flickered above, casting her shadow long and jagged, and she stared at, hit her eyes burning. Whatever came next, she'd be ready. Think Nia's got the strength to keep fighting after Ella's sacrifice? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you believe she'll turn this trap into a comeback, or tell me if you think Holt's got her cornered for good. If her grit's got you hooked, smash that like button and hit subscribe to stay locked into her battle. Now imagine this. Nia's facing a courtroom next, but will her shot at freedom hold, or will Holt's next strike rip it away in a heartbeat? Keep watching to see how it unfolds. The county lockup's steel grip loosened only slightly when the guards hauled Nia Jackson out of solitary after 8 grueling days, her body leaner, her eyes sharper, the metal shank still tucked against her waistband beneath her frayed jumpsuit. Vance and his scar-faced partner marched her through the echoing corridors, their boots a steady drumbeat on the concrete, their smirks fixed as they shoved her into a transport van. The ride to Crestwood's courthouse was a blur of rattling chains and diesel fumes, the morning sun glaring through the barred window, searing her vision after days in dim isolation. Her wrists chafed under fresh cuffs, the skin raw and red, but she sat tall, her mind racing. The tracker in her sneaker hummed faintly. Her team was out there, closing in. This hearing was her shot, a crack in Holt's wall she could pry open, if only for a moment. The courthouse squat in the heart of Crestwood, a brick relic with chipped columns and a sagging roof, its steps swarming with locals whispering behind their hands as Nia was led inside. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the air thick with tension, as she was planted in the defendant's chair, her jumpsuit a stark orange against the muted browns of the room. The judge, a wiry man named Hargrove with a pinched face and grey hair combed flat, peered over his glasses, his gaze lingering on her with a disdain she felt down to her bones. The prosecutor, a slick-haired white man in a cheap suit, stood ready, his file stacked with lies about her drug haul and assault on Ella. Nia scanned the gallery. Holt and Boone sat near the back, arms crossed, their faces smug, their navy uniforms crisp as if they owned the place. She clenched her fists, the shank's edge a cold comfort against her hip. Proceedings kicked off fast, a sham bail hearing dressed up as justice. The prosecutor laid out the charges with a practiced drawl. Possession with intent to distribute. Assault on a county employee, all tied to flimsy evidence Nia knew wouldn't hold under real scrutiny. "This woman's a danger to our community," he said, his voice rising for the handful of spectators, mostly white faces nodding along. "No bail, Your Honor, she's a flight risk." Hargrove grunted, scribbling notes, his lips pursed like he'd already decided. Nia's public defender, a nervous kid fresh out of law school, fumbled through a weak rebuttal, his voice cracking as he cited her clean record. She tuned him out, her eyes flicking to the door as it creaked open. A man in a grey suit slipped in, his posture too straight, his briefcase too new, her CIA handler, Marcus, posing as a private attorney. Relief flickered in her chest. He'd made it. Marcus strode to the defense table, cutting off the kid mid-sentence with a firm, "I'll take it from here." He dropped a folder in front of Hargrove, his voice smooth and commanding. "New evidence, Your Honor. Audio from..." A guard admitting the drugs were planted. He slid a USB drive across the bench and Nia's pulse spiked. She'd recorded Vance bragging to his buddy 2 nights ago through the cell vent, her shank doubled as a lever to pry it open, catching every word. Marcus played it cool, but she saw the glint in his eye. "Hang on." The prosecutor sputtered, "This is inadmissible, unverified," but Hargrove waved him off, plugging the drive into a laptop. Vance's voice crackled through the room, slurred and smug. "Holt said plant it, so we did. She ain't getting out." Gasps rippled through the gallery and Holt's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. Hargrove leaned back, his face sour, but the recording was clean, undeniable. "Charges lack foundation," he muttered, his tone grudging. "Dismissed. Defendants free to go." The gavel slammed, a sharp crack that echoed in Nia's ears, and the cuffs came off, the metal clattering to the table. She stood, her legs stiff but steady, her breath catching as freedom sank in. Marcus nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and slipped her a coded note as he packed up. "Evidence secured, hang on." She tucked it into her jumpsuit, her heart pounding with a victory she could taste. Holt and Boone glared from the back, their eyes promising retribution, but she walked out head high, the courthouse doors swinging wide to the humid Alabama air. She stepped onto the steps, the sun blinding after days in gloom, and inhaled deep, the shackles of solitary falling away. Marcus vanished into the crowd, his job done, and Nia started down the street, her sneakers scuffing the pavement, her mind already on the safe house 2 miles east. She'd link up with her team, debrief, end this nightmare. Then it happened. A crack split the air, a gunshot sharp and close, and pain seared her left arm, a hot streak that spun her sideways. She stumbled, blood blooming through her sleeve, and dropped behind a parked truck, her breath ragged. A sniper. Her eyes scanned the rooftops, catching a glint of steel 3 buildings down. Boone's cousin, a lanky figure in a hunting cap, racked another round, his scope trained on her. Nia pressed her hand to the wound, blood slicking her fingers, and cursed under her breath. The graze was shallow, a flesh wound, but it burned like hell. She ripped a strip from her jumpsuit, tying it tight, her training kicking in. Holt's voice crackled through a radio on a passing cop's belt. "Next time we don't miss." The words hit harder than the bullet, a vow laced with venom. She peeked over the truck, the sniper adjusting his aim, and bolted, zigzagging through the sparse crowd as another shot rang out, pinging off the asphalt inches from her heel. Her arm throbbed, her vision swam, but she pushed forward, ducking, into an alley, the brick walls closing around her like a shield. Her heart hammered, adrenaline flooding her veins, drowning the pain. The courtroom win was a mirage, a setup to lure her out. Holt and Boone hadn't folded. They'd escalated, turning freedom into a kill zone. She pressed against the wall, her breath shallow, the shank still in her waistband, a useless weight against a rifle. The alley stank of garbage and damp stone, the distant hum of traffic a lifeline she couldn't reach. Blood dripped onto the ground, a thin trail marking her path, and she wiped it with her shoe, her mind racing. Marcus's note burned against her skin. Hang on. Her team was close, but close wasn't here, and Holt's reach was long, his hate a sniper's bullet with her name on it. She slid deeper into the alley, her sneakers silent on the wet pavement, and crouched behind a dumpster, its rusted edge cold against her back. The sniper's shadow shifted on the rooftop, searching, and she held her breath, her good hand gripping the shank. She'd won in court, exposed their lie, thought she'd broken their hold. Wrong. Holt had turned the town into his weapon, Boone's cousin his trigger man, and this was their counterpunch, a public hit to silence her for good. Her arm pulsed, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage, but she forced her focus, her eyes narrowing. She'd survived solitary, fought off a mob, outsmarted a judge. She'd survived this too. The alley stretched ahead, a narrow escape, and she moved, low and fast, her shadow blending with the dark. Holt wanted her dead. She'd make him regret it. Nia Jackson stumbled through the alley, her sneakers splashing in shallow puddles, the acrid stench of garbage and wet brick filling her lungs as she pressed her hand tighter against her grazed arm. Blood seeped through the torn jumpsuit fabric, warm and sticky, but she gritted her teeth, shoving the pain down deep where it couldn't slow her. The sniper's shot still rang in her ears, Boone's cousin's scope a ghost haunting the rooftops, and Holt's radio threat looped in her. Mind, next time we don't miss. She'd made it 2 blocks from the courthouse, her legs burning, her breath ragged when she reached the safe house, a rundown shack tucked behind a sagging oak on Crestwood's east side. The door hung loose on rusted hinges. She slipped inside, locking it with a chair wedged under the knob, and collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. The room was bare, a cracked table, a single bulb swinging from a cord. But it was shelter, a breath she could steal before the next storm hit. She tore another strip from her jumpsuit, rewrapping her arm, the makeshift bandage soaking red in seconds. Her fingers shook, but she steadied them, digging the shank from her waistband and setting it beside her, its jagged edge glinting in the dim light. The tracker in her sneaker hummed, a lifeline to her team, and she clung to it, willing them closer. She needed water, food, a moment to think, but Crestwood wasn't giving her that. Through the shack's grimy window, She saw headlights flare in the distance, then voices, low at first, growing into a rumble that tightened her gut. She edged to the glass, peering out, and froze. A crowd swelled on the street. 20, 30, then 50 strong, their faces pale under the street lamps, their eyes wild with a hate she knew too well. Torches flickered, bottles clinked, and rifles gleamed in their hands. "She's here!" a man shouted, his voice hoarse, accusing. "That drug bitch burned the station." Nia's stomach dropped, her mind racing to piece it together. Holt and Boone had spun a new lie, fed it to the town, turned her courtroom win into a spark for their fire. The mob wasn't random, it was orchestrated, a vigilante army roused by radio whispers and backroom deals. She backed away from the window, her pulse hammering, as a Molotov cocktail sailed through the air, shattering against the shack's wall. Flames erupted, licking up the wood, the heat instant and suffocating. "Get her out," a woman screeched, her pitch cutting through the roar. "She'll kill us all." Nia grabbed the shank, her good arm flexing, and scanned the room. The front was lost. Fire chewed through the door, smoke curling thick and black. She dropped low, coughing, and spotted a crawl space under the back wall, a narrow gap framed by rotting boards. She dove for it, flattening herself against the floor, the heat searing her back as she clawed through dirt and splinters. Her wounded, arm dragged, pain exploding with every move, but she pushed, shimmying out into a yard choked with weeds, the night air a cold slap against her sweat-soaked skin. The shack blazed behind her, planks cracking, the mob's chants swelling. "Burn her out, end it!" She rolled to her feet, staggering into the shadows of a ditch, her breath shallow, her body screaming. She'd escaped, outsmarted them again, her lungs burning but free. The firelight danced on the horizon, the crowd's rage a living thing, and she sank lower, thinking she'd bought time. Then a crackle split the air, Boone's voice booming from a local radio tower, patched through. Every speaker in Crestwood. "Zaya Carter's armed and dangerous," he lied, his tone smooth, authoritative. "Wanted for arson and assault, shoot on sight." Her blood ran cold, the words a noose tightening around her neck. She peeked over the ditch's edge, and the mob tripled in an instant. 100 strong now, spilling from homes and bars, rifles cocked, eyes scanning the dark. They weren't just Holt's puppets anymore. They were believers, a town turned executioner by a single broadcast. Men in trucker hats barked orders, women clutched bats, kids ran alongside wielding sticks, all screaming her name like a curse. "She's close," a burly figure yelled, his shotgun raised, sweeping the shadows. Nia pressed into the mud, her arm throbbing, the shank useless against 100 barrels. She'd slipped the fire, thought she'd won, but Boone's voice had flipped the script, painted her a monster, and now every soul in Crestwood hunted her. Her breath hitched, mud caking her jumpsuit, the cold seeping into her bones. The mob fanned out, boots stomping closer, flashlight beams slicing the night. A man with a grey beard and a hunting rifle stood 10 feet away, his gaze raking the ditch, and she held still, her heartbeat a drum in her ears. He moved on, cursing under his breath, but others closed in, their shouts overlapping. "Check the trees!" "She's got to be bleeding." Nia's fingers tightened around the shank, her mind spinning. The tracker was active. Her team could find her, but this wasn't a wait-and-see game anymore. Holt and Boone had weaponized the town, turned neighbors into killers, their racism a match to dry tinder. She wasn't just a target, she was a symbol, a black woman they'd branded to destroy. She crawled along the ditch, her good arm pulling her forward, the mud sucking at her knees, every inch a fight. The mob's lights danced above, their voices a relentless tide, and she spotted a culvert, a rusted pipe barely wide enough to squeeze through. She wedged herself in, the metal scraping her skin, the dank water soaking her through, and held, her breath as boots thudded overhead. "She's gone this way," someone yelled, and a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the pipe's edge, inches from her head. Her arm pulsed, blood mixing with the filth, but she stayed still, invisible. The culvert her fragile shield. They moved past, their rage carrying them deeper into the woods, and she exhaled, her body trembling, her victory razor thin. She eased out, collapsing in the ditch, the night pressing down like a weight. The safe house was ash, her escape a fluke. Anne Boone's broadcast had lit a fuse she couldn't outrun. Holt's reach wasn't just the station, it was Crestwood itself, a town primed to hate her, to kill her, all because 2 cops said so. She dodged the flames, slipped the mob, but 100 rifles waited, their triggers itching. Her tracker hummed a faint hope, but the safe house was gone, her arm a liability, and the town a death trap. She wiped mud from her face, her eyes, burning with defiance. They'd turned Crestwood against her, thought they'd won, they hadn't. She'd fight, bleed, crawl if she had to, but she'd live. Could you outrun a mob fueled by lies like Nia did? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think she's got the edge to beat this town, or let me know if you'd crumble under that kind of heat. If her survival's got your blood pumping, hit that like button and subscribe to catch every step of her fight. Now picture Nia cornered, bleeding, but her team's on the way. Will they pull her out in time, or does Holt have one more card to play that'll bury her for good? Stay tuned to find out. Nia Jackson lay shivering in the muddy ditch, the culvert's rusted edge digging into her back, her wounded arm a pulsing ache as blood seeped through the soaked bandage. The mob's shouts faded into the distance, their flashlight beams swinging, deeper into Crestwood's woods, chasing shadows of their own making. Her jumpsuit clung to her skin, heavy with water and filth, the cold biting deep into her bones, but she forced her breathing steady, her eyes locked on the dark sky above. The tracker in her sneaker pulsed faintly, a lifeline threading through the chaos, and she clung to it, willing her CIA team closer. Boone's broadcast still echoed in her ears, a town-wide death sentence painting her as a monster, every word a lie spun from Holt's hate. She'd slipped the fire, dodged the rifles, but her strength waned, hunger and blood loss gnawing at her edges. She needed rescue now. A low rumble broke the silence, growing into the unmistakable thrum of rotor blades slicing the night. Nia tensed, her good hand gripping the shank as a black helicopter descended, its downdraft flattening the weeds around her ditch. Dust stung her eyes, but she squinted through it, spotting the CIA insignia on the tail, a sight that loosened the knot in her chest. The chopper touched down 50 yards away, its side door sliding open, and 3 figures in tactical gear leapt out, their movements swift, precise. Her team. Marcus, her handler, led them, his grey suit swapped for black fatigues, his face set, hard under a helmet. "Nia!" he called, his voice cutting through the wind as he sprinted toward her, 2 agents fanning out to secure the perimeter. She crawled from the ditch, her legs shaky, and met him halfway, mud caking her knees. "Took you long enough," she rasped, her throat raw from smoke and thirst. Marcus grabbed her good arm, steadying her, his eyes flicking to her wound. "Tracker pinged hours ago. Crestwood's a mess. We had to reroute." He pulled a canteen from his belt, pressing it into her hands, and she drank deep, the water, cold and clean, washing away the taste of dirt. The agent signaled clear, and Marcus guided her to the chopper, its blades still spinning, a roar that drowned the distant mob. She climbed in, collapsing onto a bench, the vinyl cool against her back, and Marcus slid in beside her, barking orders into a comms unit. "Lift off, now!" The helicopter surged upward, the ground dropping away, Crestwood's lights shrinking to pinpricks below. Nia's head leaned back, relief flooding her as the team handed her a med kit. She patched her arm proper, antiseptic stinging, gauze tight around the graze, and briefed Marcus between breaths. "Holt and Boone framed me, drugs first, then assault. Mob hit the safe house, sniper at the courthouse, they've turned the town." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "We've got their prints on the planted bag, audio too. Station raids greenlit. Boone's in custody tonight." Nia exhaled, a weight lifting. Justice was rolling. She'd survived long enough to see it. The chopper banked north, heading for a field base, and she allowed herself a moment to believe it might end here. They landed 20 minutes later, a grassy clearing ringed by pines, a mobile command unit, humming with activity. Nia stepped out, her legs steadier, and followed Marcus to a tent where screens flickered with live feeds. One showed Crestwood Station, SWAT swarming the lot, Boone cuffed and shoved into a van, his face twisted with rage. "Got him an hour ago," Marcus said, pointing. "Holt's next." Nia's lips curved, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. She'd exposed them, turned their game against them, and now the hammer fell. She sank into a folding chair, sipping more water, her body aching but alive. The team moved fast, prepping evidence, and she thought she'd won, thought the nightmare might crack open to daylight. Then Marcus's face darkened, his hand pausing over a tablet. "Nia," he said, his voice low, urgent, "we've got a problem." She straightened, her pulse spiking as he turned the screen toward her. A grainy photo showed a man in CIA gear, face blurred, handing an envelope to Holt outside the station, time-stamped 2 days ago. "Mole," Marcus said, his tone grim. "Sold your location, your cover, for cash. Raid was a setup." Nia's stomach dropped, her mind racing back. The sniper's precision, the mob's timing, Boone's release already in motion. "Who?" she demanded, but Marcus shook his head. "Still tracing, but it's internal, deep." Before she could process, an explosion rocked the tent, a deafening boom that flung her from the chair. The safe house, 50 yards away, erupted in a fireball, orange and black swallowing the night, shrapnel raining down as the chopper lifted, debris into a whirlwind. Nia hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her patched arm screaming as she rolled behind a crate. Marcus shouted, diving beside her, his comms crackling with panic. "Bomb! Perimeter breached!" The team scrambled, guns drawn, but the blast's heat washed over them, a wall of fire consuming gear, records, everything. Nia's eyes darted to the wreckage, her heart pounding. The mole hadn't just leaked. They'd planted death, timed, oiled to wipe her out the second she thought she was safe. She staggered up, coughing through smoke, and spotted the riverbank 30 feet west, its water glinting under the blaze. "Move!" she yelled, shoving Marcus toward it. Another blast ripped through the tent, smaller but closer, and she dove, her body slamming into the muddy shore as flames licked the air above. The river swallowed her, cold and dark, pulling her under as she kicked free of the current, her lungs burning. She surfaced downstream, gasping, her team's shouts fading behind the roar of the fire. The safe house, the chopper, the evidence, all gone, sinking with her trust. She dragged herself onto the bank, her jumpsuit shredded, her arm bleeding fresh, and lay there, the night pressing down like a shroud. Her mind spun, piecing it together. Boone's arrest was bait, the raid a trap to gather her team, and the mole's bomb a kill shot. Holt hadn't folded. He'd played them, used her own agency against her. She'd briefed Marcus, thought she'd turned the tide, only to watch it blow up in her face. The tracker was useless now, her team scattered or dead, their gear ash. She was alone again, wet and wounded, the river's chill seeping into her marrow. Holt's reach stretched beyond Crestwood, into her ranks, a betrayal sharper than any bullet. She'd escaped the mob, survived the sniper, but this hit deeper, a knife in the back from someone she'd trusted. Nia pushed to her knees, her good hand clawing the mud, her eyes burning with rage. The shank was gone, lost in the dive, but her will held, a steel core no blast could shatter. She'd been rescued, thought she'd won, only to lose everything in seconds. Holt and Boone weren't just cops. They were pawns in a bigger game. And the mole was the key. She'd find them, expose them, burn their world down. The river lapped behind her, the fire's glow fading, and she stood, swaying but unbroken. They'd tried to bury her again. They'd failed. She'd crawl back, bleed them dry, and end this no matter who she had to take down. Nia Jackson dragged herself from the riverbank, her soaked jumpsuit clinging to her shivering frame, the night air cutting through her like a blade as she stumbled through the pines. The safe house explosion still roared in her ears, a fiery echo of betrayal, her team's screams swallowed by the blast. Her arm bled fresh, the gauze lost in the dive, and her legs trembled from exhaustion, but she pushed north, mud caking her sneakers, her mind a steel trap locked on survival. Crestwood was a death zone now, Holt's mob and the mole's bomb shredding her every move. The tracker was dead, drowned in the river, her last link to the CIA severed. She needed refuge, a place to breathe, and one name burned through this haze. Lena, her older sister, living 40 miles away in Montgomery. Family was her anchor, the only thing Holt hadn't touched. Yet. She hiked through the dark, skirting roads where headlights might mean rifles, her good hand clutching her side, her wounded arm dangling limp. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the horizon smudged with clouds, and she hitched a ride with a trucker hauling timber, his cab reeking of cigarettes and pine sap. "Rough night?" he asked, eyeing her torn clothes, but she muttered, "Work accident." And he shrugged, dropping her at Montgomery's edge without questions. She staggered through quiet streets, past brick row houses and corner stores, until she reached Lena's duplex, a faded blue two-story with a sagging porch. Nia pounded the door, her knuckles raw, and Lena answered, her warm brown eyes widening at the sight. "Nia? Lord, what happened?" she gasped, pulling her inside, her voice thick with worry. The living room smelled of lavender and fresh bread, a stark contrast to the filth Nia carried. Lena, taller and softer than her, wrapped her in a blanket, her hands trembling as she fetched a first aid kit. "You're bleeding," she said, dabbing antiseptic on Nia's arm, her touch gentle but firm. Nia winced, the sting sharp, but let her work, the warmth of the house thawing her bones. "Long story," she rasped, sipping water Lena pressed into her hands. "Cops framed me. Crestwood's gone crazy." Lena's jaw tightened, her braids swaying as she shook her head. "I saw the news. Armed and dangerous? That's not you." Nia forced a grim smile. "They're good at lies. I just need a night, then I'm gone." Lena nodded, her eyes fierce. "You're safe here." Safe felt fragile, a word too thin to hold. Nia slept fitfully on the couch, the blanket soft, but her dreams jagged with fire and gunfire. She woke to dusk, the room dim, Lena cooking stew. In the kitchen, the clatter of pots a lifeline. She stood, stretching her stiff limbs, and checked her arm, the bandage holding, the pain duller now. She'd rest, plan, find a way to hit back. Then glass shattered, a scream splitting the quiet, and Nia bolted upright, her pulse spiking. Lena stumbled from the kitchen, her face pale, as three men in ski masks burst through the back door, their boots crunching glass, their fists clutching pipes and knives. "Where's she at?" one growled, his voice muffled but venomous, and Nia knew. Holt's thugs, tracking her here. She lunged for Lena, shoving her behind the couch as a pipe swung, smashing the coffee table to splinters. "Run!" Nia yelled, dodging a blade that sliced the air inches from her throat. Lena bolted for the shed out back, her footsteps pounding, and Nia faced them, her training snapping into place. She grabbed a lamp, swinging it hard, the base cracking against the first thug's skull. He dropped, groaning, and she kicked the second in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. The third lunged, his knife flashing, and she twisted, taking a shallow cut across her ribs before driving her elbow into his jaw. He staggered, and she shoved him out the door, slamming it shut, her breath ragged. Smoke curled in, thick and sharp, and she spun, horror gripping her. The shed blazed, flames licking the wood, Lena's scream piercing the night. Nia sprinted outside, the heat slamming her face, her eyes watering as she circled the fire. "Lena!" she shouted, spotting her sister trapped inside, pounding the locked door. The thugs had torched it, a trap within a trap, and Nia rammed. The frame, her shoulders screaming, wood splintering under her weight. She yanked Lena out, coughing, her sister's arm burned but alive, and they collapsed in the yard, the shed crumbling behind them. Sirens wailed, neighbors peering from windows, and Nia thought she'd saved her, thought they'd escaped Holt's reach. Then her burner buzzed, a number she didn't know, and Holt's voice slithered through. "Nice try. Lena's wanted for arson now, statewide. You're both done." She froze, the phone slipping, her victory ash in her mouth. Lena clutched, her sobbing, the fire's glow painting her face in streaks of orange and black. "What's he mean?" she whispered, and Nia's gut twisted, rage and guilt colliding. Holt had framed Lena, flipped the rescue into a manhunt, his voice a promise of more pain. Police lights flashed down the street, closing in, and Nia pulled Lena up, her mind racing. "We've got to split," she said, her voice hard. "They'll take you too." Lena nodded, tears cutting through soot, and darted north, disappearing. Into the dusk as Nia turned south, drones buzzing overhead, their red eyes hunting them both. The duplex smoldered, their childhood home gone, Holt's revenge a wildfire spreading beyond Crestwood. Nia ran, her ribs stinging from the cut, her arm throbbing, the night swallowing her as sirens Dopplered behind. Holt hadn't just tracked her. He'd struck her heart, burned her family, turned Lena into a fugitive with a single call. She'd saved her sister, pulled her from the flames, only to lose her to his lies. The drones hummed, a mechanical swarm, and she ducked into an alley, her breath shallow, her resolve a jagged edge. He'd taken her team, her home, now her kin, each blow sharper, crueler, a racist vendetta with no end. She thought Montgomery was sanctuary, it was a battlefield. Alone again, hunted again, she clenched her fists, blood dripping from her knuckles. Holt wanted her broken. She'd break him first. Would you risk everything to save family like Nia did? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think she's unstoppable even now, or tell me if Holt's finally pushed her past the edge. If this fight's got you gripped, smash that like button and hit subscribe to follow her every move. Now imagine Nia on the run, her sister a target too. Can she turn the tables with one bold strike, or will Holt's next twist drown her in the chaos? Keep watching to see where this storm takes her. Nia Jackson darted through Montgomery's alleys, her sneakers pounding wet pavement, her breath a rasp as drones buzzed overhead, their red lights slicing the dusk like predatory eyes. Her ribs stung from the thug's knife, her arm throbbed. Under its makeshift bandage, and her jumpsuit hung in tatters, soaked with sweat and soot from Lena's burning shed. Holt's voice lingered in her ears, his phone call a venomous spike. Lena framed for arson, a statewide manhunt splitting them apart. She'd saved her sister, pulled her from the flames, only to lose her to his lies, and now she ran alone, a fugitive in a city turned hostile. The duplex fire still smoked in her mind, a wound deeper than the cuts on her skin, but she shoved it down, her focus narrowing to a single goal: strike back, hard. She slipped into a derelict warehouse on the city's edge, its windows boarded, its walls tagged with faded graffiti, the air thick with dust and mold. A rusted ladder led to a loft, and she climbed, her good arm straining, until she reached a perch overlooking the street. Below, police cruisers prowled, their sirens a distant wail hunting her and Lena on Holt's orders. She crouched, her mind racing, and spotted an old TV station relay box in the corner, its cables frayed but intact, a relic from the 90s. Her CIA training kicked in. Hack it, hijack it, turn Holt's broadcast game against him. She pried. It opened with her fingers, nails splitting, and found a live feed, a weak signal she could boost. Evidence burned in her memory. Vance's recorded confession, Holt's threats. She'd lost the USB, but she'd memorized every word, every inflection. Using a shard of glass from the floor, she sliced open a power line, hot wiring the box, sparks popping against her knuckles. The screen flickered to life, a local news channel blaring weather updates, and she patched in, her voice hoarse but steady, as she recorded a makeshift broadcast. "This is Nia Carter," she said, her tone cutting through static. "Crestwood. Cops Derek Holt and Travis Boone framed me for drugs. Assaulted a nurse, burned my sister's home, here's the truth." She recited Vance's audio word for word, Holt's call about Lena, every damning detail, then looped it, setting the signal to blast across Montgomery's airwaves. Her hands shook, blood dripping from her cut ribs, but she hit transmit, the feed hijacking every TV in a 50-mile radius. She sank back, her chest heaving, as the broadcast took hold. Outside, horns blared, voices rose, the city waking to her words. She'd turned the tide, she thought, exposed them raw and live, a victory snatched from their lies. Within an hour, sirens multiplied, but not for her. Protesters flooded Crestwoods, streets their chants echoing on the wind. No more corruption. Justice now. She climbed to the warehouse roof, peering through a cracked skylight, and saw Boone's squad car swarmed, his cuffs snapping on as a crowd cheered. Her lips curved, a flicker of triumph cutting through her exhaustion. Holt's pawn was down. She'd flipped the script, turned Crestwood against them. Then the warehouse TV crackled, a new broadcast overriding hers, and Holt's face filled the screen, his smirk cold, his uniform pristine. "Nia Carter's a terrorist," he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "This video proves it." Grainy footage rolled. A woman in an orange jumpsuit, her planting a bomb, the safe house exploding in a fireball. Nia's stomach dropped, her breath catching. It was fake, stitched together from scraps, her face superimposed, but it was slick, believable. "She's behind the Crestwood attacks," Holt continued. "Armed and dangerous. Nationwide alert." The screen cut to news anchors, their faces grave, parroting his lies. FBI manhunt underway. Protesters faltered, boos turning to gasps, and Nia's victory crumbled, ash in her throat. She staggered back, her mind reeling. Holt hadn't just countered, he'd escalated, turned her truth into a weapon against her. The warehouse shook as boots pounded outside, federal marshals breaching the doors below, their shouts sharp. "Nia, Carter, surrender." She'd aired the real story, thought she'd won, only to hand Holt a bigger stage. Her broadcast had rallied the town, cuffed Boone, but his fake video flipped it, branded her a national threat. Flashlight beams swept the loft and she bolted, her legs screaming down a fire escape slick with rain. Marshals stormed the roof, their radios crackling with orders, and she dropped into a sewer grate, the metal clanging shut above her as she splashed into ankle-deep muck. The tunnel stank of rot and damp stone, its walls slick with slime, but she ran, her sneakers slipping, her breath a rasp. Holt's lie had spread nationwide, her face on every screen, her name a curse. She'd hacked the station, turned the mob against Boone, thought she'd cracked his empire, but he'd outplayed her, his fake video a masterstroke. Marshals hunted her now, not just Crestwood's yokels, and the FBI's reach was long, relentless. Her ribs bled, her arm pulsed, her body a wreck, but she pushed deeper, the sewers dark, swallowing her whole. She'd lost the loft, lost the broadcast, lost everything again. Holt's racism, a hydra growing new heads with every cut. She slumped against the tunnel wall, water dripping overhead, her hands trembling as she wiped blood from her face. The tracker was gone, her team ash. Lena a fugitive, and now she was America's most wanted, a terrorist born from Holt's lies. She'd thought exposure would end it, that truth would burn brighter, but he'd twisted it, made her the villain in a story she couldn't rewrite. Her chest tightened, despair clawing at her, but she shoved it back, her eyes narrowing. He'd taken her family, her agency, her name, each blow a hammer strike, but she wasn't done. She'd crawl through this filth, find a way, hit him harder. The sewer stretched endless, a labyrinth of shadows, and she moved, her resolve a flicker in the dark. Holt thought he'd won, he'd see. Nia Jackson slogged through the sewer's dank tunnels, her sneakers sloshing in fetid water, her breath a shallow rasp as the cold bit into her battered body. Her ribs ached from the knife wound, her arm pulsed with fresh blood seeping through. The torn jumpsuit and her legs trembled from days without rest, but she pressed on, the darkness her only ally. Holt's fake broadcast had branded her a terrorist, turned the nation against her, and federal marshals had snatched her from Montgomery's underbelly within hours, their boots stomping just as she'd thought she'd slipped free. Now she was caged in a max security prison 30 miles south, a concrete fortress ringed with watchtowers and electrified fences, her name whispered as a cop killer after Holt's latest lie. She'd been hauled in, processed, and dumped in a cell, her body a wreck but her mind a live wire, plotting. The prison was a labyrinth of grey walls and clanging steel, its air thick with the stench of sweat and despair. Nia sat in a solitary block, her cell a 10 by 10 box with a steel bunk and a slit window too high to reach, the walls scarred with claw marks from those who'd broken before her. Days bled into weeks, her orange uniform stiff with grime, her wounds scarring over, but her strength fading under meager rations of watery gruel. Guards taunted her through the bars, their voices dripping with Holt's venom. "Terrorist bitch," one spat, slamming his baton against the door. "Heard you took out a cop," another sneered, his eyes glinting with hate. She stayed silent, her gaze steady, but the lie burned. Holt had murdered a guard, pinned it on her, and stacked her charges to life without parole. She wasn't alone long. They moved her to Gen Pop, a cavernous hall of 200 women, their eyes sharp with suspicion, their fists ready for blood. Word spread fast. Nia Carter, the cop killer, the terrorist. A wiry inmate with a shaved head and a teardrop tattoo cornered her on day 3, a shiv glinting in her grip. "You don't belong here," she hissed, lunging, but Nia sidestepped, her training sharp despite her weakness, and twisted the woman's arm until the blade clattered free. "I'm not your enemy," Nia said, low and firm, releasing her. The woman backed off, wary, and others watched, a grudging respect flickering in their stares. Nia saw her chance. Allies leverage a way out. She worked fast, her CIA instincts humming. She befriended a lifer named Raina, a broad-shouldered black woman with a scar across her lip and a knack for smuggling contraband. "Heard your trouble?" Raina said, her voice a gravelly drawl, but her eyes softened when Nia shared her truth. "Framed, hunted, betrayed." Raina nodded, slipping her a stolen phone. "Use it smart," she whispered. Nia hid it in her bunk, her mind spinning a plan. She rallied 5 others, outsiders like her, fed up with the guards' brutality, promising freedom if they moved, as one. They'd stage a riot, breach the East Wing, hit the gate during shift change. It was risky, reckless, but staying meant death by Holt's design. Day 10. Dawn. She struck. Raina sparked the chaos, overturning a chow table, her roar igniting. The block. Inmates surged, fists flying, trays crashing, and Nia slipped through, signaling her crew. They smashed a laundry cart into a guard post, glass shattering, batons swinging, and she snatched a key card from a downed officer, his blood pooling under her feet. Alarms blared, a deafening wail, and she led them east, her ribs screaming as she ran, the phone clutched tight. They hit a locked gate, the card buzzing it open, and daylight flared ahead. Freedom so close she could taste it. "Go!" she yelled, shoving Raina through as guards closed in, their shouts drowned by sirens. Nia darted out last, the fence looming, and scaled it, her hands bleeding on the wire, her body electric with adrenaline. She dropped to the other side, rolling into a field of tall grass, her breath ragged but free. The prison faded behind her, a grey monolith spitting chaos, inmates scattering as choppers buzzed overhead. She'd done it. Broken out, her crew, splitting into the wind, her victory a rush that burned through her veins. She sprinted north, the grass whipping her legs, thinking she'd outrun Holt's cage when a spotlight pinned her, bright and blinding. "Nia Carter, freeze!" A voice boomed and she skidded, her heart sinking as a SWAT team emerged, rifles raised, Holt stepping from their ranks, his smirk wide and cruel. "Nice try," he said, his voice a taunt, his gun aimed at her chest. Her knees hit the dirt. Her body spent, and a bullet tore through her leg, hot and fast, dropping her flat. Blood gushed, soaking the grass, and she gasped, pain exploding white behind her eyes. Holt loomed over her, his boots inches from her face, his laugh a dry rasp. "Told you I'd get you resisting arrest," he said, holstering his weapon as SWAT cuffed her, their grips iron. She'd escaped, orchestrated the riot, thought she'd won only to walk into his trap. He'd planned it, let her break out, staged the guard's death to justify this. A public execution framed as justice. Her vision blurred, blood pooling under her, and she stared up at him, her eyes burning defiance through the haze. They dragged. Her back, her leg dragging limp, the cuffs biting deep, and tossed her into a van, its doors slamming with a finality that echoed in her skull. Holt rode up front, his silhouette smug through the partition, the SWAT team silent, complicit. She'd rallied the inmates, breached the walls, tasted freedom for minutes only to lose it in a hail of lead. Her leg throbbed, her body a wreck, but her mind stayed sharp, replaying his words, resisting arrest. He'd turned her escape into his triumph, a racist vendetta dressed as law, and she was back in chains, deeper than ever. The van rumbled north, the prison's lights fading, and she slumped against the wall, her breath shallow, her resolver ember in the dark. He thought he'd ended her. He hadn't. The SWAT van jolted over rough asphalt, its engine a guttural growl that vibrated through Nia Jackson's battered frame as she slumped against the cold metal wall, her wrists cuffed tight, her leg a throbbing mess of blood and torn muscle. The gunshot wound Holt had inflicted oozed crimson, soaking her jumpsuit. Each bump in the road a jolt of agony that blurred her vision. Her ribs ached from the old knife cut. Her arm pulsed under its ragged bandage, and her body screamed for rest. But she forced her eyes open, her mind clinging to a thread of defiance. Holt sat up front, his silhouette smug through the partition, his voice a low murmur to the driver. Hospital first, then lockup. She won't talk. She'd broken out of max security, led a riot, tasted freedom, only to collapse in his trap, his bullet a shackle heavier than steel. But she wasn't done. Her good hand brushed her waistband, feeling the faint outline of a hidden device, a tiny recorder sewn into the lining, a backup she'd scavenged from Rayna's contraband stash before the break. It was voice-activated, a long shot, but her last card. She shifted, wincing as pain lanced through her leg, and angled her body, her breath shallow as Holt turned, his eyes glinting through the partition. "Still kicking, huh?" he said, his tone a mocking purr. "Thought you'd bleed out by now." Nia met his gaze, her voice hoarse but steady. "You'll wish I had." He laughed, a dry, grating sound, and leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. "You're nothing, Carter. Terrorist, cop killer, whatever I say. This bullet's my word against yours." The recorder hummed, catching every syllable, and Nia's lips twitched, a faint spark of hope igniting. "Keep talking," she rasped, egging him on. Holt obliged, his ego a floodgate. "Planted the drugs, burned your sister's place, shot that guard myself. All clean, all pinned on you. Crestwood eats it up, and the feds? They'll bury you deeper than your team's ashes." He tapped his gun, smirking. "This? Just the cherry on top. Resisting arrest, dead on arrival. Perfect." Nia's chest tightened, rage and triumph warring within her. But she stayed still, letting him dig his grave. The van slowed, pulling into a hospital lot, its neon sign flickering in the dusk, and she braced herself, blood pooling under her thigh. The doors flew open, SWAT piling out, and Holt grabbed her arm, yanking her onto a stretcher, her legs screaming. As medics swarmed. "Save her!" he barked, his voice loud for show. "She's got a trial to face." They wheeled her inside, the sterile stink of antiseptic hitting her nose, lights glaring overhead as nurses hooked her to monitors, their hands quick but wary. Her leg burned, blood loss dragging her under, but she clung to consciousness, the recorder's weight a lifeline against her hip. She'd lost the prison break, taken a bullet, thought she'd die in that field, but Holt's gloating was her weapon now. Doctors stitched her up, fluids pumping into her veins, and she faded, her last thought a vow. He'd pay. She woke to rotors chopping the air, a black helicopter landing in the hospital's lot, its CIA insignia a ghost from her past. Marcus burst through the doors, his fatigues dirt-streaked, his face hard with fury. A dozen agents at his heels, guns drawn. "Nia!" he shouted, shoving past SWAT, and she blinked, her vision clearing as he reached her bedside. "Found the mole," he said, his voice tight. "He's down, we've got air support." Shots rang out, a firefight erupting in the hall, SWAT clashing with her team, Holt's bellow cutting through. "She's mine!" Nia fumbled the recorder free, pressing it into Marcus's hand, her fingers slick with sweat. "Holt's confession," she croaked. "Everything." Marcus nodded, barking orders, and the agents stormed the lot, guns blazing as Holt fired back, his SWAT cronies dropping under precise headshots. Nia dragged herself up, IV lines snapping, and stumbled to the window, her leg a dead weight, adrenaline, her only fuel. Marcus tackled Holt, cuffs snapping on, his smirk gone, replaced by a snarl as agents hauled him into the chopper. Medics rushed her back to bed, stabilizing her, and she sank into the pillows, her pulse steadying. Hours later, she woke in a private room, Marcus at her side, his face grim but triumphant. "Holt's locked up," he said. "Boone, too. Charges dropped. You're clear." Relief washed over her, heavy and sweet, the nightmare cracking open. She'd recorded Holt, handed him over, watched her team dismantle his empire in a hail of bullets. She'd won, bled out every ounce of strength to do it, and now she rested, her body a wreck but alive. Marcus left, promising updates, and she exhaled, the hospital's hum a lullaby. Then it shattered. A blast rocked the building, the wall, exploding inward, debris flying as screams filled the air. Boone's voice crackled over a stolen radio, out on bail somehow. "You're not done, Carter." The ceiling buckled, light sparking, and Nia rolled off the bed, her leg useless, dragging herself through rubble as the ward burned, dozens dead in the collapse. She crawled free, her hands clawing concrete, her lungs choking on dust. The hospital, a smoldering ruin behind her. Blood streaked her face, her stitches torn, but she kept moving. Boone's bomb a final apocalyptic blow. She'd taken Holt down, cleared her name, thought it was over, only to lose it all again in fire and chaos. Sirens wailed, distant now, and she collapsed in an alley, her breath shallow, her eyes burning with rage. Boone had vanished, his revenge a slaughter, and she was back to square one, wounded, hunted, alone. She pushed to her knees, her fists clenched, a vow searing her soul. She'd find him, end him, no matter the cost. The night swallowed her, the fight far from finished. Nia Jackson crouched in the alley, her breath a ragged cloud in the chill night air, her body a roadmap of scars and fresh wounds as she pressed her back against the soot-streaked brick. The hospital's ruins smoldered a block away. Boone's bomb a fresh wound in Montgomery's skyline, its echoes of screams and crumbling steel still ringing in her ears. Her leg throbbed from Holt's bullet, her ribs burned from the old knife cut, and her arm ached under its torn bandage, blood crusting her jumpsuit in dark patches. She'd crawled from the wreckage, dozens dead behind her. Boone's voice on the radio, a taunt that fueled her rage. She'd taken Holt down, cleared her name, thought she'd ended it, only to watch victory turn to ash in a blast that shook her world apart. But she wasn't broken. Not yet. Weeks passed in a blur of pain and evasion, Nia moving through shadows, scavenging food from dumpsters, patching her wounds with stolen gauze from a gas station first aid kit. Her leg healed slow, a limp she couldn't shake, but her mind stayed razor-sharp, plotting her return. Marcus found her in a derelict motel, his face haggard, his team rebuilt with new faces she didn't trust. "Boone's underground," he said, handing her a burner phone. Holt's confession stuck, he's life without parole. "We've got a federal hearing in D.C., testify, and we bury this." She nodded, her jaw tight, and took the offer, her resolve a fire that wouldn't die. She'd end it clean in court for good. The federal courtroom in Washington glowed with polished wood and stern faces, a stark contrast to Crestwood's sham justice. Nia sat at the witness stand, her orange jumpsuit swapped for a borrowed suit, its fabric stiff against her scarred skin. Her leg ached under the table, but she sat tall, her voice steady as she recounted every blow, the planted drugs, the mob, the sniper, Lena's burning shed, the prison break, Holt's confession, Boone's bomb. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling, jurors leaning forward, their eyes wide with shock. Marcus flanked her, his evidence airtight. Recordings, footage, witness statements, and the judge, a black woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense stare, nodded as Nia spoke, her gavel a promise of order. Holt sat in chains, his smirk gone, his eyes hollow, while Boone, recaptured days ago, glared from the dock, his cuffs clinking with every shift. The prosecution built its case, layer by layer, Nia's testimony, the cornerstone. "They framed me because I'm black," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "Turned a town, a nation against me with lies. The jury convicted fast, Holt and Boone sentenced to life, no parole, their empire of corruption crumbling, under the weight of truth." Cheers erupted outside, protesters chanting her name, news vans blaring her vindication. CIA agent exposes racist cops. Marcus squeezed her shoulder, a rare smile breaking his grim mask. "You did it," he said, and she exhaled, the weight lifting, her scars a badge of survival. She'd fought, bled, won. It was over. She stepped from the courthouse, the DC air crisp with autumn, reporters swarming but held back by agents. Her limp slowed her, but her head stayed high, the taste of justice sharp on her tongue. A juror, a wiry man with glasses, and a nervous tick slipped through the crowd, his hand brushing hers as he passed a note. She unfolded it, her pulse spiking at the scrawl. "They're just pawns. The real boss is watching." Her eyes darted up, scanning the faces, and landed on a suited figure across the street, leaning against a black sedan, his smirk faint but unmistakable. Director Grayson, her CIA chief, The man who'd signed her missions, trained her, sent her into Crestwood. His grey eyes locked on hers, a predator's glint, and her stomach dropped, the world tilting under her feet. She froze, the note crumpling in her fist, her mind racing back through every hellish turn. Grayson's orders to infiltrate Crestwood, his silence when her team burned, the mole he'd found too late. Holt's resources, Boone's bail, the bomb. Too precise, too funded for small-town cops. She'd been a test, a lab rat in his game, her pain data for some twisted agenda. The hospital dead, Lena fugitive, her life shredded, all his design. Marcus approached, his voice distant. "Nia, you okay?" But she didn't answer, her gaze fixed on Grayson as he slid into the sedan, its engine purring to life. He'd played her, sacrificed lives, watched her fight to prove her worth, and now he stood untouchable, the puppet master unmasked. Her chest heaved, rage boiling over, drowning the relief she'd felt minutes ago. She dismantled Holt and Boone, thought she'd won justice, only to find the real enemy at the top, her own director, a shadow king. The courtroom victory was a sham, a stage he'd set, her triumph his experiment. She limped forward, Marcus grabbing her arm, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" he asked, but she shook him off, her voice a growl. "It's not over." Grayson's car vanished into traffic, a taunt she couldn't chase, and she stood there, the note a blade in her hand, the crowd's cheers a hollow roar. She'd cleared her name, freed herself, only to uncover a war she hadn't known she was fighting. Nia turned from the courthouse, her limp heavier now, her eyes burning with a fury that dwarfed Holt's hate. Grayson had used her, broken her, turned her into a weapon for his own ends, and she'd survived it all, blind to his strings. The dead haunted her, hospital victims, her team, Lena's lost life, and she vowed they'd not die for nothing. She'd hunt him, expose him, rip his world apart as he'd done hers. The fight wasn't Holt or Boone. It was bigger, darker, a betrayal etched in her bones. She slipped the note into her pocket, her fists clenched, and walked into the dusk. The city's hum a battle cry. Grayson thought he'd won, thought she'd bend, he'd see her coming. Nia Jackson's harrowing journey in White Cop's frame black woman, unaware she's a CIA agent, the truth explodes in court, offers profound lessons about resilience, systemic injustice, and the cost of truth. First, Nia's unyielding spirit teaches us that strength isn't just physical. It's a fire in the soul that burns through betrayal, violence, and despair. She faced racist frame-ups, mob attacks, and even her own agency's treachery, yet she never broke, showing that determination can defy the darkest odds. Second, the story exposes the chilling reality of systemic racism. Holt and Boone wielded power not just as individuals, but as cogs in a machine that turns lies into law, targeting Nia for her identity as much as her actions. It's a stark reminder that prejudice often hides behind badges and broadcasts, amplifying its damage through complicity. Third, the betrayal by her CIA director underscores that trust can be a double-edged sword. Even allies can harbor agendas, forcing us to question who truly stands with us. Finally, Nia's relentless fight for justice, even after losing everything, her team, her sister's safety, her freedom, highlights the steep price of standing up. Victory came, but Boone's final strike proved evil doesn't rest, urging us to stay vigilant. What can we take forward? Resilience must be our shield, awareness our weapon, and unity our strength against forces that thrive on division. Nia's story isn't just a tale. It's a call to confront injustice head-on, no matter the scars. So what do you think? Could you keep fighting like Nia after all she endured? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if her grit inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of courage. Share this to spark the conversation. Thanks for joining this journey. Here's to standing tall against the storm.